Imagine achieving everything you've ever dreamed of, yet still feeling like a complete fraud. Like your success is a fluke and you're just waiting to be exposed. You stand in front of colleagues who admire you, friends who celebrate you, family who's proud of you, and inside, you're screaming that none of it's real, that you've somehow tricked them all. This isn't just self-doubt. It's a deep, insidious struggle that silently erodes self-worth, piece by piece, achievement by achievement. In this investigation, we'll expose the unseen emotional toll of imposter syndrome, a feeling far more common than you realize and far more devastating than most people understand. What do you think it feels like to live every day believing you're a fraud? The woman who just received a promotion sits alone in her office, door closed, hands trembling. She should be celebrating. Instead, she's convinced they made a mistake, that they'll realize soon enough she doesn't belong here. The student who graduated top of his class can't shake the feeling that he somehow cheated the system, that his grades were accidents, flukes, generous grading from professors who pitied him. The artist whose work hangs in galleries walks past her own paintings and feels nothing but shame, certain that real artists would see through her immediately. These aren't isolated cases. These are the hidden victims of something psychologists have been studying for decades, something that doesn't discriminate based on actual competence or achievement. Imposter syndrome doesn't care how successful you are. In fact, it often grows stronger the more you accomplish, feeding on your achievements like a parasite that thrives on your success. The term was first coined in 1978 by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, who noticed a disturbing pattern among high-achieving women. Despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, these women were convinced they weren't intelligent. They believed they had fooled anyone who thought otherwise. But here's what makes this psychological phenomenon so insidious. It wasn't about actual performance. These women were objectively successful. Their imposter feelings existed entirely independent of reality. Would you believe someone who told you they felt like a fraud even after seeing their impressive resume? The psychological scars left by imposter syndrome run deeper than most people realize. This isn't about occasional self-doubt or the normal nervousness that comes before a big presentation. This is about a fundamental disconnection between reality and perception, where your brain actively works against you, rewriting your history of success into a narrative of deception. It's about living in constant fear of exposure, as if your life is a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. The erosion of self-worth happens slowly, almost imperceptibly. It starts with small dismissals of your own achievements. You got the job because they were desperate. You won the award because the competition was weak. You received praise because people were being polite. Each success becomes evidence not of your competence, but of your ability to deceive. And with each dismissal, your sense of self-worth chips away a little more. What makes this particularly cruel is that external validation doesn't help. In fact, it often makes things worse. When someone praises your work, the imposter syndrome sufferer doesn't feel validated. They feel more anxious, because now the stakes are higher. Now more people believe the lie. Now there are more people to disappoint when the truth inevitably comes out. The praise becomes a burden, another weight added to the already crushing pressure of maintaining the facade. The psychological toll manifests in ways that aren't immediately obvious. There's the chronic anxiety that hums in the background of every achievement, every interaction, every moment of recognition. There's the exhaustion that comes from constantly monitoring yourself, analyzing every word you say, every decision you make, looking for evidence that you're about to be exposed. There's the isolation that develops when you're convinced that everyone around you is genuinely competent while you're the only fraud in the room. Have you ever felt like everyone else knows what they're doing except you? To understand how imposter syndrome leaves such deep psychological scars, we need to trace it back to its origins. Because this doesn't appear out of nowhere. The seeds of imposter syndrome are often planted early, in childhood, in classrooms, in the subtle messages we receive about who we are and what we're worth. Consider the child who grows up in a household where achievement is expected, not celebrated. Where an A- prompts concern rather than pride. Where success is the baseline, and anything less is failure. This child learns that their worth is conditional, tied entirely to performance. But here's the trap: no matter how well they perform, it never feels like enough. Because the goalpost keeps moving, the bar keeps rising. And they internalize the message that they must constantly prove themselves, that their value is always in question. Or consider the opposite scenario. The child who's constantly told they're gifted, special, naturally talented. This sounds positive, doesn't it? But it creates its own trap. Because when success comes easily early on, these children never learn to attribute their achievements to effort, strategy, or skill development. They believe success should be effortless if you're truly talented. So when they eventually encounter challenges, and everyone does, they interpret struggle as evidence that they were never actually talented at all. That they were frauds all along, and now they're being exposed. The educational environment plays a crucial role in shaping these patterns. In competitive academic settings, students learn to compare themselves constantly to their peers. They see someone else's success and interpret it as evidence of their own inadequacy. They internalize the idea that there's a limited amount of success to go around, that someone else's achievement diminishes their own. This zero-sum thinking creates a breeding ground for imposter feelings, where you're always measuring yourself against others and always coming up short in your own estimation. Then there are the subtle messages about who belongs in certain spaces. The student who's the first in their family to attend college, walking through campus feeling like an outsider. The woman in a male-dominated field, constantly aware that she's different, that she has to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. The person of color in predominantly white spaces, carrying the weight of representation, knowing that their mistakes will be seen as reflective of their entire community. These individuals face an additional layer of imposter feelings because the world around them sometimes reinforces the message that they don't belong. What messages did you receive growing up about success and failure? The societal pressures that feed imposter syndrome have only intensified in recent decades. We live in an age of curated perfection, where social media presents an endless stream of other people's highlight reels. Everyone else seems to have it figured out. Everyone else seems confident, successful, effortlessly achieving their goals. What we don't see are the struggles, the failures, the moments of doubt that everyone experiences. We compare our messy, complicated internal reality to everyone else's polished external presentation, and we conclude that we're the only ones struggling, the only ones who don't truly belong. The modern workplace amplifies these pressures. The expectation of constant productivity, constant innovation, constant growth. The performance reviews and metrics and key performance indicators that reduce your worth to numbers on a spreadsheet. The hustle culture that glorifies overwork and treats rest as weakness. In this environment, imposter syndrome thrives because there's always more you could be doing, always someone doing it better, always evidence that you're not enough. And then there's the luck narrative, perhaps the most insidious aspect of imposter syndrome. This is the tendency to attribute every success to external factors beyond your control. You got the job because you knew someone. You won the contract because the timing was right. You received the promotion because your boss liked you, not because you earned it. This narrative is so seductive because it provides a simple explanation for the cognitive dissonance between your achievements and your self-perception. If success is just luck, then you don't have to reconcile your accomplishments with your belief that you're not competent. But here's what this narrative does. It strips you of agency. It denies you the ability to take credit for your own hard work, your own skills, your own growth. Every time you attribute success to luck, you reinforce the belief that you have no control over your outcomes, that you're just a passive recipient of random fortune. And this belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you don't believe your efforts matter, why would you invest in developing your skills? Why would you take risks or pursue opportunities? The luck narrative also creates a terrifying vulnerability. Because if your success is just luck, then it can disappear at any moment. You're not building something sustainable. You're just riding a wave that will eventually crash. This creates a constant state of anxiety, a feeling that you're always one mistake away from losing everything, from being revealed as the fraud you believe yourself to be. Do you find yourself attributing your successes to luck rather than skill? The psychological scars of imposter syndrome aren't always visible from the outside. The sufferer often appears successful, confident, accomplished. They've learned to perform competence to hide their internal turmoil behind a professional facade. But inside, the erosion continues day after day, achievement after achievement. One of the most devastating aspects is the way imposter syndrome distorts memory. When you accomplish something, your brain doesn't file it away as evidence of competence. Instead, it gets rewritten, reframed, minimized. That successful project? You remember all the mistakes you made, all the ways it could have been better. That glowing performance review? You focus on the one piece of constructive feedback, convinced that's the truth and everything else was just politeness. Your brain becomes an unreliable narrator of your own life, systematically erasing evidence of your competence while amplifying every flaw, every mistake, every moment of uncertainty. This creates a profound sense of disconnection from your own achievements. You look at your resume, your portfolio, your list of accomplishments, and you feel nothing. Or worse, you feel like you're looking at someone else's life, someone who somehow managed to fool everyone. There's no sense of pride, no feeling of earned success. Just a growing anxiety about when the deception will be discovered. The emotional toll is exhausting. Imagine carrying a secret that you believe would destroy your life if revealed. Imagine living in constant fear of being found out. That's what imposter syndrome feels like. Every interaction becomes a potential exposure. Every question becomes a test you might fail. Every success becomes another lie you have to maintain. The cognitive load of this constant vigilance is immense, leaving little energy for anything else. This exhaustion manifests in various ways. Some people become perfectionists, working themselves to the bone trying to prevent any mistake that might reveal their supposed incompetence. They over-prepare for every meeting, agonize over every email, spend hours on tasks that should take minutes. Because if they're going to maintain the illusion of competence, they can't afford any slip-ups. But perfectionism is a trap. It's never enough, and the standards keep rising, creating an unsustainable cycle of overwork and anxiety. Others respond with procrastination, avoiding tasks because the fear of failure is so overwhelming. If you don't try, you can't fail. If you don't put yourself out there, you can't be exposed. But procrastination creates its own problems, leading to rushed work, missed opportunities, and actual performance issues that then reinforce the imposter feelings. It becomes a vicious cycle. Fear leads to avoidance. Avoidance leads to poor outcomes. Poor outcomes confirm the fear. Have you ever avoided opportunities because you were afraid of being exposed as inadequate? The social impact of imposter syndrome is equally devastating. When you believe you're a fraud, you isolate yourself. You don't share your struggles because you're convinced everyone else has it figured out. You don't ask for help because that would reveal your incompetence. You don't celebrate your successes because you don't believe you deserve celebration. This isolation reinforces the imposter feelings because without reality checks from others, your distorted self-perception goes unchallenged. Relationships suffer too. It's hard to be vulnerable with others when you're convinced that your true self is fundamentally flawed. You keep people at arm's length, afraid that if they really knew you, they'd see through the facade. You might sabotage relationships, consciously or unconsciously, because you believe you don't deserve love or connection. Or you might become a people pleaser, constantly trying to prove your worth through service to others, never feeling like you can just exist and be valued for who you are. The career implications are profound. People with imposter syndrome often don't negotiate for higher salaries because they don't believe they deserve them. They don't apply for promotions because they're convinced they're not qualified. They don't speak up in meetings because they assume their ideas aren't valuable. They turn down opportunities because they're afraid of being exposed. All of this holds them back professionally, creating a gap between their potential and their actual achievements, a gap that then becomes more evidence that they're not as competent as others think. But perhaps the deepest scar is the loss of joy. When you can't take credit for your achievements, when every success is tainted by the fear of exposure, when you're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, there's no room for satisfaction, for pride, for the simple pleasure of a job well done. Life becomes a series of narrow escapes rather than a collection of victories. You're always running from something rather than moving towards something, and that's no way to live. The physical health impacts shouldn't be overlooked either. Chronic stress and anxiety take a toll on the body. Sleep disturbances, digestive issues, headaches, muscle tension, these are common among people struggling with imposter syndrome. The constant state of hypervigilance keeps the nervous system in fight-or-flight mode, which was never meant to be sustained long-term. Over time, this can contribute to more serious health problems, from cardiovascular issues to weakened immune function. What would your life look like if you truly believed in your own competence? Here's one of the cruelest aspects of imposter syndrome. It often intensifies with success. You'd think that accumulating achievements would eventually convince someone they're competent. But for the imposter syndrome sufferer, Each new success just raises the stakes. Now there are more people to disappoint. Now the fall will be harder. Now the exposure will be more public, more humiliating. This creates a paradoxical situation where the more successful you become, the more fraudulent you feel. The CEO who has built a thriving company but lies awake at night convinced the board will realize they made a mistake. The best-selling author who believes their success was a fluke and they'll never write anything good again. The renowned surgeon who second-guesses every decision, convinced that one day their luck will run out and they'll make a fatal error. These individuals have objective evidence of their competence, years of successful outcomes, recognition from peers, tangible achievements. But imposter syndrome doesn't operate on logic. It operates on feeling, and the feeling says, you're a fraud. No amount of external evidence can override that internal conviction. This is partly because imposter syndrome involves a fundamental attribution error. When things go well, it's attributed to external factors, luck, timing, other people's help. When things go poorly, it's attributed to internal factors, your incompetence, your inadequacy, your fundamental flaws. This creates an unfalsifiable belief system. Success doesn't count as evidence of competence because it's explained away. Failure counts as evidence of incompetence because it confirms what you already believed. You can't win. The moving goalpost phenomenon makes this worse. Every time you achieve something, the definition of real success shifts. You got into college? Well, it wasn't a top-tier school. You got into a top-tier school? Well, you haven't graduated yet. You graduated? Well, you don't have a job yet. You got a job? Well, it's not a senior position. You got promoted? Well, you're not an executive yet. There's always another level, always another achievement that would finally prove you're competent. But that achievement never comes because the goalpost keeps moving. When was the last time you allowed yourself to feel genuinely proud of an accomplishment? The comparison trap intensifies this pattern. In any field, there's always someone more successful, more talented, more accomplished. And imposter syndrome sufferers focus obsessively on these comparisons. They don't compare themselves to where they started or to the average person in their field. They compare themselves to the absolute top performers and find themselves lacking. This creates an impossible standard, one that guarantees they'll always feel inadequate. Social media has made this comparison trap infinitely worse. We're now exposed to a constant stream of other people's achievements, carefully curated and presented in the most impressive light possible. We see the book deal, not the years of rejection. We see the promotion, not the decades of grinding work. We see the perfect family photo, not the chaos that preceded it. And we compare our messy, complicated reality to these polished highlights, concluding that everyone else has it figured out while we're barely holding it together. The imposter cycle becomes self-reinforcing. You feel like a fraud, so you overwork to compensate. The overwork leads to success, but you attribute that success to the overwork rather than to your competence. This reinforces the belief that you need to work twice as hard as everyone else just to keep up, that if you ever relaxed or worked normal hours, you'd be exposed. So you keep overworking, keep achieving, keep feeling like a fraud. The cycle continues, and the psychological toll accumulates. Beyond the individual suffering, imposter syndrome exacts a broader cost that we rarely discuss. Think about all the innovations that never happened because someone didn't believe their idea was worth sharing. All the books that were never written because the author was convinced they had nothing valuable to say. All the businesses that were never started because the entrepreneur didn't believe they were capable. All the leadership positions that went unfilled by qualified candidates who didn't think they deserved the role. Imposter syndrome doesn't just hurt the individual, it deprives the world of contributions that could have made a difference. When talented, capable people hold themselves back, we all lose. When diverse voices stay silent because they don't believe they belong in the conversation, our collective understanding suffers. When people with unique perspectives and experiences don't pursue opportunities because they feel like frauds, we miss out on the innovation and insight they could have provided. This is particularly true for underrepresented groups who face additional barriers and biases. When a woman in tech doesn't apply for a leadership role because she doesn't feel qualified, that's not just her loss, it's a loss for the entire industry that needs diverse leadership. When a first-generation college student doesn't pursue graduate school because they feel like they don't belong in academia, that's a loss for the field that needs perspectives from different backgrounds. Imposter syndrome doesn't exist in a vacuum. It intersects with systemic inequalities, often hitting hardest those who already face the most barriers. How many opportunities have you passed up because you didn't feel ready or qualified enough? The workplace culture that enables imposter syndrome also costs organizations dearly. When employees don't speak up with ideas or concerns because they don't feel their input is valuable, companies miss out on crucial information and innovation. When talented people leave because they don't feel they belong, organizations lose institutional knowledge and have to invest in recruiting and training replacements. When team members don't ask for help because they're afraid of appearing incompetent, projects suffer and mistakes go uncorrected until they become major problems. There's also the cost of human potential unrealized. Every person struggling with imposter syndrome is operating below their capacity, not because they lack ability, but because they're expending enormous energy on managing their anxiety and maintaining their facade. Imagine what they could accomplish if that energy were freed up. Imagine the creativity, the productivity, the innovation that could emerge if people felt secure enough to take risks, to experiment, to fail and learn without it confirming their worst fears about themselves. The mental health costs are staggering. Imposter syndrome is strongly associated with anxiety, depression, and burnout. It contributes to substance abuse as people try to manage their stress and anxiety. It damages relationships and social connections. It diminishes quality of life in profound ways. And because it is often invisible, because sufferers are good at hiding their struggles, these mental health impacts frequently go unaddressed until they reach crisis levels. The first step in addressing imposter syndrome is recognizing it, naming it, understanding that it's a common psychological phenomenon rather than an accurate reflection of reality. When high-profile figures like Maya Angelou, Albert Einstein, and Michelle Obama have spoken about their own imposter feelings, it helps normalize the experience. It reminds us that imposter syndrome isn't about actual competence. It's about the gap between our internal experience and external reality. But recognition alone isn't enough. We need to understand the mechanisms that maintain imposter syndrome so we can actively work against them. We need to challenge the narratives we tell ourselves about our successes and failures. We need to practice attributing our achievements to our own efforts and skills rather than to luck or external factors. We need to collect and review evidence of our competence, even when our brains try to dismiss or minimize it. We need to talk about it. The silence around imposter syndrome is part of what makes it so powerful. When everyone is privately convinced they're a fraud while publicly appearing confident, it reinforces the belief that you're the only one struggling. But when we start having honest conversations about these feelings, we realize how common they are. We realize that the person who seems so confident and accomplished might be dealing with the same doubts and fears. This doesn't make the feelings go away, but it does make them less isolating. If you could tell your younger self one thing about imposter syndrome, what would it be? We also need to examine and change the systems and cultures that feed imposter syndrome. Educational environments that emphasize competition over collaboration, that treat mistakes as failures rather than learning opportunities, that measure worth solely through grades and test scores. These create breeding grounds for imposter feelings. Workplaces that lack transparency about qualifications and decision-making, that don't provide clear feedback and development opportunities, that promote toxic competition among employees. These perpetuate imposter syndrome. Creating cultures of belonging where people feel valued for who they are rather than just what they produce is crucial. This means actively working against biases and barriers that make some people feel like they don't belong. It means celebrating effort and growth, not just outcomes. It means normalizing struggle and failure as part of the learning process. It means providing mentorship and support, especially for those who are navigating spaces where they're underrepresented. The psychological scars of imposter syndrome run deep, but they're not permanent. With awareness, support, and intentional work, people can develop a more accurate and compassionate view of themselves. They can learn to recognize their competence, to take credit for their achievements, to see themselves as they truly are rather than through the distorted lens of imposter syndrome. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it's possible. So what do you do if you recognize yourself in this description? If you've spent years feeling like a fraud, how do you begin to change that narrative? It starts with awareness. Notice when imposter thoughts arise. Notice the patterns, the situations that trigger them, the narratives you tell yourself, the ways you dismiss your achievements. You can't change what you don't recognize. Keep a record of your accomplishments, and more importantly, keep a record of the skills and efforts that led to those accomplishments. When your brain tries to attribute success to luck, you have concrete evidence to challenge that narrative. Seek out reality checks from trusted others. Find people who can provide honest, specific feedback about your strengths and areas for growth. Not generic praise, but detailed observations about what you do well and why. These external perspectives can help calibrate your self-perception when it's been distorted by imposter syndrome. And when someone gives you positive feedback, practice accepting it rather than immediately dismissing it or explaining it away. Challenge the perfectionism. Recognize that mistakes and imperfection are not evidence of fraud, they're evidence of being human. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has areas where they're still learning and growing. That doesn't make you a fraud, it makes you normal. Practice self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you'd offer a friend who is struggling. What would change in your life if you truly believed you deserved your success? Reframe failure and struggle. Instead of seeing challenges as evidence that you're not really competent, see them as opportunities for growth. Competent people face difficulties. That's how they become more competent. The struggle isn't proof that you don't belong, it's proof that you're pushing yourself, learning, developing. Embrace the growth mindset that says abilities can be developed through effort and learning, rather than the fixed mindset that says you either have it or you don't. Connect with others who share similar experiences. Whether through support groups, therapy, or honest conversations with colleagues and friends, breaking the isolation of imposter syndrome is crucial. Hearing others describe feelings that mirror your own helps you realize you're not alone, that these feelings are common even among highly successful people. And sharing your own struggles can help others feel less alone too. Consider working with a therapist who understands imposter syndrome. Professional support can be invaluable in unpacking the roots of these feelings, developing strategies to challenge them, and building a more accurate and compassionate self-perception. Cognitive behavioral therapy in particular has been shown to be effective in addressing the thought patterns that maintain imposter syndrome. Set boundaries around work and achievement. If you've been overworking to compensate for feeling like a fraud, practice working reasonable hours. If you've been saying yes to every opportunity out of fear that saying no would expose you, practice selective commitment. Your worth isn't determined by how much you produce or how busy you are. You deserve rest, leisure, and a life beyond achievement. Most importantly, practice believing in your own competence, even when it feels uncomfortable or false. Act as if you belong, even when you don't feel like you do. Speak up in meetings, apply for opportunities. Take credit for your work. Share your ideas. The feelings might not change immediately, but behavior change can eventually lead to belief change. You can't wait until you feel confident to act confident. Sometimes you have to act first and let the feelings catch up. The psychological scars of imposter syndrome are real and deep, but they don't have to be permanent. You are not a fraud. Your achievements are real. Your competence is real. The gap between how you see yourself and how others see you isn't because you've fooled everyone. It's because your self-perception has been distorted by a common psychological phenomenon that has nothing to do with your actual abilities. You deserve to feel proud of what you've accomplished. You deserve to take up space in your field, in your workplace, in your life. You deserve to believe in yourself as much as others believe in you. The journey from feeling like a fraud to recognizing your own competence isn't easy, but it's worth it. Because on the other side of imposter syndrome is a life where you can fully own your achievements, where you can take risks without paralyzing fear, where you can be present and engaged rather than constantly monitoring yourself for signs of exposure. What would you attempt? If you knew you couldn't fail, the woman who received the promotion, she deserved it. The student who graduated top of his class, he earned it. The artist whose work hangs in galleries, she belongs there. And so do you, wherever you are, whatever you've achieved, you're not a fraud. You never were. It's time to start believing that. If this investigation into the hidden scars of imposter syndrome kept you thinking, if you recognized yourself in these patterns, if you're ready to challenge the narrative that you're a fraud, subscribe. Because understanding the psychological battles we face is the first step toward winning them. Another deep dive into the human experience unfolds next week.